Guys, and thank you so much, whether this is the first event you've come to this week or whether you've been coming along all week. It's been really wonderful all week to be thinking a little bit about this theme of, the Christian Union have called it Made for More, and I guess what we've been thinking about is what humans are for, what it means to be human, what it means to be in the world as we find it, and how we perhaps start thinking about some of the really big questions of what makes us us, and how we interact with the world in which we live. And of course, this is the end of that week, although doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. The Christian Union aren't going anywhere, and there's going to be plenty of opportunities to keep on thinking about these sorts of things. But being the end of the week, it gets me thinking about endings. And I wonder, have you ever stopped to think about how you feel generally about the fact that things come to an end? That pretty much everything you experience comes to some sort of conclusion in the end. You come to university, at some stage you finish an essay, that's a fantastic ending. You get rid of it and it's done. You finish an exam, that's a fantastic ending. You graduate, you finish your degree, you finish your time in Nottingham perhaps. That might be a mixed feeling. Some perhaps excitement for what's ahead, some perhaps daunted, some perhaps sad at leaving behind. But everything we experienced comes to an end in the end. Actually, if you think about it, endings are everywhere, aren't they? Literally everywhere. Every single day, the sun rises and then the sun sets. Every season rolls one season into another. Winter rolls into spring, rolls into summer, rolls into autumn, and then winter comes again. Think of a child that you know. Every single child goes through periods that come to an end. That small baby grows to the toddler phase, unsteady on their feet, and then just in the blink of an eye, they're staggering into primary school, kind of really nervously, before suddenly it seems that they're walking into secondary school with just about as much confidence as they can muster. Before that's finished, they turn up at university, they're adults, and then before you know it, the cycle starts again. Human life is characterised by a series of beginnings and endings, and we have really strong relationships with those endings. We never really let them go by unnoticed. As I say, some of them can be really, really positive. Something that we haven't enjoyed comes to an end and we feel relief. Something comes to an end and we're excited because that means there's the beginning of something else. Something comes to an end and we're simply just daunted. And then, of course, there are those endings that leave us feeling much more negative. The endings that leave us feeling bereft, even, and mourning. The thing about endings, though, is what they never do is pass us by unnoticed. We always respond to them somehow. We always notice them in some way. And when you think about it, that's a bit strange. Because endings are so ubiquitous, they're so normal, they're part of every single moment of every single day. Why is it that we have this relationship with them, that we will notice them every single time? And we comment on them, and we respond to them. In fact, the way that we respond with almost surprise at endings, it's almost as if it's a little bit like they surround us so much, it would be like a fish being constantly surprised at how wet water is. They're just part of life. It's what we swim in. Unless, perhaps, we were actually designed for a wholly different type of world, where endings weren't quite so ultimate. Because, of course, the biggest and most final ending, the one that frankly we would prefer not to have to think about, and even as I raise it, some people in the room are going to feel uncomfortable, or all sorts of other different mixtures, is that one day every single one of us will end. That death itself is a final reality, a final ending, which we in the end can't escape. And yet we continue to have this sort of surprised and difficult relationship with it, even though it is an entirely normal part of the reality in which we live. It was brought home to me and to, well, the whole country very clearly just a few months ago with the death of Queen Elizabeth, wasn't it? I don't know if anyone was surprised or taken aback slightly by the depth of the response to the death of Queen Elizabeth. In some ways, I used to be a doctor, right? I used to work in a care of the elderly ward, looking after people at the end of their lives when they were at the extreme of age. In some ways, the death of a 96-year-old woman is not shocking or surprising, particularly when she died of age-related causes. And yet, wasn't shock and surprise one of the emotions that seems to characterise our nation's response to the death of Queen Elizabeth? It was like she wasn't supposed to. She was supposed to go on forever. And in fact, figure after figure, all sorts of public figures said exactly that. As the MPs stood up in Parliament that week and spoke out their tributes to the Queen, over and over and over again they were saying she represented some sort of sense that she would just go on forever. This feels like something's gone wrong. She should still be here. Amazingly, ironically, I think it was actually Emmanuel Macron, the French president, who almost put it most powerfully in his tribute to her. He said this: "She was one with her nation. She embodied a people, a territory, and a shared will and stability. Above the fluctuations and upheaval of politics, she represented," get this, "she represented a sense of eternity," he said. And more broadly, as we start talking about this topic and we start talking about human fears and we start talking about endings, and ultimately we cast our minds and allow ourselves to go somewhere near the idea of death, we have to recognise that this is, broadly speaking, pretty much the human fear. It's the thing we would rather not think about, but we know one day will face us. It's the thing which confronts us when we'd really rather it didn't. One philosopher, Ernest Becker, said, "The idea of death, the fear of it, haunts the human animal like nothing else." And actually, it's really interesting that when you start looking at the way we respond to the idea of death and fear of death, did you know people have done lots of research on this, on what it does to human behaviour? It's something called mortality sentience. So if you're thinking about the fact that you're mortal, it will actually affect the way you behave. So the research has shown that if you're conscious of the fact that you're mortal, when you are making the decision to name a child, you are, I think it's 10 times more likely, I think that's right, yes, 5 to 10 times more likely to name your child after yourself, if you're thinking about the fact that you're mortal. And you're half as likely to name it after a relative, if you're thinking about your own mortality, that is. If you are on an election day, someone causes you to consider your mortality before you walk into the polling station and put your X in the box, you are at least twice, maybe 5 times more likely to vote for a charismatic authoritarian figure than to vote on ideological principles. And if you are conscious of your own mortality, you are 10 to 50 more times more likely to want to chase after fame and legacy than you would be at any other time. And so what we do is we live in this manufactured idea of immortality. We don't think about death. And if you've got the money or the extreme opportunity, people will go to incredible efforts to try and get death as far away as possible, and ultimately to try and see if they can overcome it. So I don't know if you're familiar with the organisation Cryonics UK. Cryonics UK is an organisation which actually runs under the banner of a trade company called Alcor in the US. And what they do is they recruit members who will pay for the small price of £250,000 for the privilege of being frozen as close to death as possible just after they've died, and then shipped to was essentially an enormous freezer in the US desert in the anticipation that one day medical technology might get far enough that you can be defrosted and cured from whatever has just killed you. £250,000. There's about 1,500 members of this organisation in the UK, of Cryonics UK. And here's the real ticket, right? The people who do the freezing are the members themselves. So for £250,000, you can have the privilege of dying and then being frozen by some other people who've spent £250,000 to have the privilege of dying and then being frozen by some other people, and so the cycle goes. And all of it is to try and avoid, ultimately, and get round death. And it's incredible the extremes that we will go to. It's what drives the trend towards so-called transhumanism, right? That we might somehow one day be able to get to the point where we can upload our consciousnesses digitally so that we won't have to die. It is incredible the lengths we will go to avoid death, that we would even get to the point where we stop being human and remove our physical selves entirely. Death will drive us to dehumanize ourselves. In a smaller way, that was evident during the COVID pandemic, right? What drove the way in which we behaved during the COVID pandemic? It was fear of death. It was fear that we might die from this unknown virus. And so we cut ourselves off from one another and from relationships, which are one of the core things that make us human. We shut down schools and education, which are one of the core things about being human as humans grow, is that we learn and are nurtured. And we shut ourselves into our homes. We were willing to lay aside something of our experience of everyday humanity in order to avoid death. It's the deep fear that we dare not speak. There's a reason why the supreme villain, he who must not be named in Harry Potter, he's called Voldemort, using the French word for death, mort, in part of his name. It is the fear which must not be named. And if we can't avoid it, well, then what we do is we ignore it. We do not want to go anywhere near it. We shut it up behind clinical doors called hospitals. And as it starts to encroach on people's lives, we shut it up behind other doors and call them nursing homes, so that we can put it behind, put it away, and we don't have to think about it, and we don't allow it into our conscious experience. We live insulated lives. And then we distract ourselves. Commenting on this, one writer, a guy called Peter Kreeft, wrote this. He said, if you're typically modern, and we are, then your life is like a mansion with a terrifying hole in the middle of the living room floor. So you paper over the hole with a very busy wallpaper pattern to distract yourself. You find a rhinoceros in the middle of your house. The rhinoceros is wretchedness and death. How in the world can you hide the rhinoceros? Simple. Cover it with 1 million mice. Multiple distractions. Which is a very quirky way of basically saying we distract ourselves from reality. How many distracting mice come out of our phones every day, taking us away from the reality of a world that is filled with endings, and one ultimate ending most of all? We don't want to think about it, but the question is, why? Why would we be so fearful and also surprised by something which is as natural as the ending of life, given that it happens every day, in every town, across the entire world? Why would we react the way we do? Could it be that we are made for a world that's different? A world in which endings are not so ultimate, and our experience of death is entirely different. Because the problem is that in the end, one way or another, death has a habit of confronting us. We can insulate ourselves from it, we can try and avoid it, we can ignore it for as long as we can, but in the end, it will confront us. This was brought home to me just last week. Just last week, I got the news that someone that my wife and I went to school with, who was the only other person in one of my wife's GCSE classes, had died of bowel cancer. I'm not yet 40. But death had confronted us, and frankly come and smacked us in the face. And one day, it will happen to each of us. It may have happened to you before, and it hurts, and it feels wrong. And yet it's everywhere. Why is that? What world are we comparing this world to, that something that is such an integral part of the world feels like it shouldn't be there? And what will we do about it? When it's our loved ones, when we see it in the news, ultimately when it's ourselves, how will we face up to the reality of death and the fear of death without ultimately dehumanizing ourselves, making ourselves less than human? That, if you like, is the big question that we're going to be thinking about this evening, and in some ways is the big question we've been thinking about all week as we think about whether or not we are made for more, made for a world which is more. All week, as we've been thinking about these things, we've been wanting to give people the opportunity to discuss them, because we think that they are really, really important. And it might well be that you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't agree with what you're saying. In which case, we want to give you the opportunity to think about why you don't agree. There's no good just not agreeing because you don't agree. You need reasons to disagree with something as important as the claims that are made about Christianity and about humanity through the Christian faith. So we're going to pause a few times this evening and give opportunities for discussion just where you are. And you might want to just turn to the person next to you and just have a very quiet chat about some of the things I've been saying. Maybe you're disagreeing with something and you just turn to them and say, actually, I didn't agree with what he said there. I'm not going to be offended. That's fine. Just say that to them and chat with them about it. But talk about why. Or it may be that you'd like to have a bit more of a discussion, and you're thinking, well, I don't really have any response right now. Well, we're going to give you a couple of questions that might just help you as you talk. They're on the table in front of you, so you don't have to remember them. There's a couple of sheets of paper on the table. But here are the first two questions for us just to chat about now. How do you, as you think about it, how do you instinctively react to endings, the fact that things come to an end in our lives? And then secondly, as we think about that, how do the surprises of endings, and especially the ultimate ending, the ending of death, affect the way you live and even the way you feel? We'll give you a few minutes, have a chat among yourselves, and I'll be back in a little bit. As I say, there's going to be more opportunity for this discussion to continue as we continue on through the evening. But it's worth saying that this question of the ultimate ending, this question of death as we think about it, is really where death is really where life brings us face to face and even confronts us with the claims made about Jesus Christ, about the centre of Christianity. When we start thinking about death, in the end, we cannot escape the claims that Christianity will make. We need to reckon with them. Because at the very centre of Christianity is famously the claim that Jesus, in history, faced death for us and won. Defeated it, and that he did that with it whilst being the most fully alive human that has ever walked the earth. That is the centre of the claim about Jesus that Christianity makes. And so what I would love you to do is basically just turn with me to the source of that claim, which is found on these little books, these little yellow and grey books which are on your tables. They say uncover on the front of them. This is a copy of one of the 4 accounts of Jesus' life, which you find in the Bible. It's a copy of the Gospel of John. And if you return with me to page 116 in these books, we'll turn to the penultimate chapter of John's Gospel. And on page 116, I'm just going to read the first half of sentence number 19, little number 19, about a third of the way down the page. This is the story John is telling us. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders. Well, that's the scene he sets. So what I want you to do is to get into this story. Whatever it is you believe about this story, whether you believe it to be true or not, if in order for us to properly understand it, we need to step into it and understand what's happening. So I want you to picture with me maybe a dark, gloomy room. It's a relatively large room, and as your eyes get accustomed to the gloom, you pick out maybe 13, maybe 15, maybe 20 or so figures in there. 11 of them in particular are people whom we would know as Jesus' disciples. They're friends of Jesus who've been hanging around with him for about 3 years. And they're sitting in this gloomy room with the shutters closed to the world outside. What the world outside is a dusty Middle Eastern street. It is hot, it is noisy, it is the centre of a city. But all of that is shut out. The shutters are closed, the door is locked. And what you realise in that room is that the atmosphere is like crackling. You can cut the atmosphere with a knife. It is tense. Because it is frightened. The disciples, Jesus' friends, have shut and locked the doors to keep people out for fear. And the question is, what are they afraid of? And the answer is, they're afraid. They are afraid for the same reason, the fear that we have been talking about already this evening. They are afraid because of death. Because on Friday, they saw their dear friend Jesus nailed to a wooden cross outside the city, dying a death which literally invented the word excruciating. And now it's Sunday. They saw a spear pierce his heart sac and saw what looked like blood and water leave his body. He was dead. They know he was dead. He died. And now, because they've been following him around for 3 years, they are fearful because they wonder, are we going to be next? Are we going to go to crosses too? You have to imagine in your mind's eye the kind of the way that they'd be jumpy at every single noise, a raised voice in the street, a scrabbling around the front of the door. Are we going to go next? They're twitchy. And it's into that context that John describes what happens. Look again at verse little number 19. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. And you kind of think, in the context of the story, overjoyed, that doesn't even really cover it, does it? Amazed, astonished. There they are, fearful for their own lives, mourning the one whom they had pinned all their hopes on. That when he died, it was as though their hopes had died with him. And now, John says, he's standing there, very much alive, in the room with them, talking to them. Incredible, amazing. What you are reading is the source of the claim that Jesus' life means that we can face even death because we were made for more. And it is amazing. It is an amazing claim. Unbelievable, even. And interestingly enough, one of Jesus' friends agrees. Totally unbelievable. Because it turns out that Thomas isn't there. Have a look at little number 24. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We've seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." See, Thomas is a rational guy. He knows that people don't rise from the dead. He knows dead people stay dead. And we know that dead people stay dead. It's one of the fundamental things that a junior doctor learns. So one of the first things when I was a junior doctor that I learned was to certify people dead. I will never forget having to do it. But one of the rules is that once you have diagnosed death, it's irreversible. That's the point. And Thomas knows this too. And so he says, I'm not going to believe it. I can't believe it. And what's more, he knows that grief does funny things to people. And he is only going to believe what he can touch and see. And he is sure that he is not going to be able to touch and see this. And let's face it, he probably wouldn't offer to go poking around in Jesus' open wound unless I can put my hand into his side, unless he was pretty sure that wasn't going to happen. Imagine the next week with me. Because the narrative in John's account actually fast forwards 7 days in the very next sentence. But imagine those 7 days with me. Imagine the conversations that might happen between Jesus' friends. Thomas, you've got to believe it. We saw him. He spoke to us. You've got to believe it, guys. You've got to get over it. He's dead. That's the end of it. Dead people don't rise. He's dead. You've got to let this go. No, but Thomas, we saw him. Guys, it's impossible. You didn't see him. I wonder if there was lost tempers and raised voices. As the disciples, as Jesus' friends, the rest of them and Thomas's friends are saying, why won't you trust us? And he's saying, look, you're on the verge of doing one of the most dangerous things that anyone could possibly do. Deny the reality of death. You're going to be living in, well, a made-up world. But then look what happens next. Little number 26. A week later, Jesus' disciples were in the house again and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. It's exactly the same scene, except there's one difference. This time, Thomas is there. And Jesus, once again, is standing among them, speaking to them. But then notice, when he speaks to Thomas, he literally offers Thomas to do the thing that Thomas had wanted to do 1 week earlier. It's almost as if he'd been in the room the whole time. Put your hand into my side. Put your fingers where my nail marks were. Stop doubting and believe. See and touch so that you can believe that I am alive. And in the context of the story, you've got to ask, well, what on earth can Thomas do? What can he say? Little number 28. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. What else can he say? And it's worth asking what the most important word in those 4 words that Thomas says is. My Lord and my God. 2 of them are pretty big words, right? Lord. You deserve to be the one who's in control. God, the maker of all things, the source of all goodness, standing in front of me. But I want to suggest to you that perhaps the most important word Thomas says is my. My Lord and my God. Because that makes it personal. Because the thing about the fear of death and the ultimate ending that we all face is it is inescapably personal. As someone once said, the worst thing about the dreaded statistic is that one day we will all become a statistic. It's inescapable. It affects every single one of us personally. And that means that the hope of Jesus' resurrection, the claim that Jesus rose from the dead to indestructible, undying life, having died for us and risen for us, if we will receive him, is the offer of personal, indestructible life. That Jesus' death means we can face even death because we were made for more. That Jesus' life means we can face even death because we were made for more. That is the Christian claim. And that is why the Christian Union has run this week of events, and why I've been here for a week away from my family in Nottingham instead of Cambridge to try and share it with you. Because we think this is true. and we think it changes everything, because it changes even death. But as we say, we want to give the opportunity to discuss these things. We think they are worth discussing because we think they are important. And so we're going to give another opportunity now for you to just have a moment to talk about some of the things you've seen. You have just heard the source of the Christian claim. You've got it in your hands. And so you might already be thinking, well, this is complete rubbish. Fine, turn to the person next to you and tell them why you think it's rubbish. Or if not, maybe these questions would be worth discussing. What do you make of the claims about Jesus' resurrection? And maybe just for a moment, just stand in a different place for a moment. If they were true, how might they transform our relationship with and our attitude towards death, our fear of death, that we've been thinking about this evening? Those questions are on those little slips of paper again, so you can find them if you need to. I'll give you a few minutes, and then I'll be back shortly. One of the other things that we've been keen to do this week is we're talking about huge ideas, and sometimes it can feel like these are just massive ideas that somewhere functioning at 50,000 feet in the air or something like that. The question is, how do these ideas come down to earth? How do they actually hit the ground? One of the best ways for finding that out is to hear from people about how it has affected their lives and the way in which it has impacted them. And so I'm going to invite Arian to come and join me. So we're going to hear from him now. Awesome. Good to see you, Arian. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi.
Hold on, I'm not sure the mic's on. Let me check. You speak into this one and I'll turn this one on.
Okay. Hi, my name is Arian. I'm a first year politics and international relations student in Nottingham. I don't know what else, I'm from Bushy. That helps there.
Brilliant. And we're obviously thinking a little bit about the claims of Christianity. What was your experience of Christianity and of religion in general as you grew up?
For a bit of context, I'm coming from an immigrant family. My mum's from the Bible Belt of America, and deeply religious people. And my dad's Indian, Hindu, and my family, they were really devout as well. I mean, we have a family temple out in India for they preach Hinduism and stuff like that. So both sides were deeply religious growing up. I mean, I remember seeing my grandma pray for hours before the shrine each day, and it's like two really heavy influences from each side, and it was quite almost overwhelming growing up because there's just so much religion in that household that it felt like I know there's no space for anything else. Yeah.
So that's quite a lot to hold in your head together. With one side of your family from America, one side of your family from India, I know you spent some time in both countries, quite a bit of time whilst you were growing up. How did that affect you, that kind of being from different cultures and then being in the UK?
I think people don't think about it that often, but there's a really big culture gap between America and England, but even more so India and England. I mean, the things that you take for granted, just growing up here in England, I never really experienced. So growing up in school and all that, even niche references and stuff like that, I never really got, and so I always felt like a bit of a outsider when it came to English culture and all that, and I felt like it was kind of hard to fit in at first. So when I go to school, it's quite an atheist, non-secular world. Kids are growing up discovering themselves, and I just wanted to fit in. So I kind of pushed away religion and just tried to focus on making friends, getting through school, and just having a good time. So I never really thought about any of that. I was kind of just living life for the sake of it. I mean, I didn't have any faith myself at that point in time. So like, I was just like, I'm here, I'm living life until I'm gonna die one day, and that's just it, yeah.
So it's just life as it comes, just every day, whatever it's going to be. And obviously, there's that all of that background must have been quite pressing on you as you sort of pushed it away. And now here you are, sitting with me, telling your story in an event being run by the Christian Union. So what was it that changed the way you thought and believed things?
Well, so my mum, she's deeply religious, and she's like been a secretary at the church I went to growing up. So I went to Sunday school growing up and all that, just like, you know, for her sake. And during DUV, I had to do volunteering, so she made me like do stuff for the church, like turn out the Sunday school chairs, all like that, and I helped run it. And so I made some friends at the church growing up, and like they invited me to a Christian festival, and I heard this guy talk, and it was like, I didn't really care at the time. I was like, I'll just go because everyone else is going. I don't want to go home at the tent. But he was talking about why he was like a Christian, and like the reason he had to just go out and tell people. And he mentioned Matthew 28:19-20. Something along the lines like, "Go therefore, make disciples of all the nations, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit." And like the next part was like, "And I will be with you to the like the end of age," or something like that. And I don't know why, but it really hit me. And so I went back home. I didn't think much of it at first, but like I found a Bible lying around because my mum kept them everywhere. And so I picked the Bible, opened it up, read that bit, and I thought, that's really interesting. Like, if this is true, you know, like I've got to learn more about this. So I went to church for the first time. Went to the sermon for the first time in years, and I thought it was a really interesting talk. So I was like, you know what, let's give this a shot. And started reading the Bible more, at the church more often, just so on more regularly. And like, there's no one point, but like over time, I was like, I found myself like thinking, you know what, this is true. Like, I have found God, and like it was a big moment, but like spread out over like a year or so.
And what was it about that verse that really kind of got you? Something obviously got under your skin. What was it about that particular verse?
I think it was just like it's quite a claim. Like, I will be with you to the end of age. Like, no matter what happens, like an absolute promise that God will be with me no matter what. And I felt like I finally I found like a reason. Like, I was here. Like, I wasn't just living life for the sake of it. I was living life here, family life, eternal life in heaven. I was like, you know, Jesus died for me, and it's just, it was really weird. It's like I suddenly went from not caring about like what happened to me at all to thinking like I've got so much to live for, like, because, you know, God's just blessed me with an amazing life.
Thank you. And we've reached the end of the week. There's undoubtedly going to be people here who are thinking different things about what I've said so far, different things about what you've said so far. Some people are going, nah. Some people are going, interesting. Some people are like, intrigued. What advice would you give for someone who was wanting to think, I want to think more about this? What would be your advice?
I'd say, like, first of all, like, it may seem like some cheap gimmick that's used to come up like made for more, but like, we really are made for more. Like, there's so much more that's on offer to us than just like this life on earth. I mean, we have so much more to live for than, like, you know, just basic like material things. And so I recommend, like, if you have a Christian friend, like, you know, ask them to take you to church. Like, I'm not saying, like, you know, you become like a devout Christian overnight, but like, just try it out, because, you know, worst comes to worst, you don't believe it. Like, it is the truth, and surely you'd want to, even if it's not true, take a chance on it being true. Like, I don't think I'm wording this right, but what do you have to lose?
It's worth investigating.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. It's been really good to hear your story. So for Aaron, it was a promise in one small verse of another account of Jesus' life by Matthew. I will be with you to the end of the age. I will always be with you. And it got under his skin, and he couldn't let it go. I wonder if that's something that some of us are experiencing this week. Something that we've heard this week is getting under our skin. And the question is, what kind of a man can make a promise like that? I will be with you always, forever. What kind of a man can make a promise like that? And what kind of a person could keep a promise like that? Only a person who is living an indestructible life. And it may be that at this point of the week, you've heard plenty already. Or it could be that this is the first event you've come to this week. But you're at least recognising that if this is true, this is kind of incredible in the this is amazing sense. This is absolutely amazing. If this is true, this is an amazing thing. But of course, it was all very well for Thomas, wasn't it? He could see and he could touch. Jesus was standing there right in front of him. And the question, of course, is that prompts is, what about us? Well, we don't have Jesus standing in front of us, so what are we supposed to do? Well, open again with me into these accounts of Jesus' life. And turn again to that part we were in earlier on, page 118 this time. That's where we've got to. Little number 29. Thomas declares, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." It turns out that Jesus understands us. He gets that we will sit here and go, well, what about us? We can't see, we can't touch. What about us? And he knows exactly that people are going to make that response. And the point is, actually, if you stop and think about it, do you actually only believe things that you have seen and touched? Is that really how you work in your life? You only believe things that you've seen and touched yourself. Think about the things that you are sure of, absolutely 100% sure of in this life. Are they all things you have checked out for yourself? Of course they're not. How much of what you are sure of is actually stuff that you are trusting what you've been told? And if we believe something that we've only been told, that we haven't checked out ourselves, the big question is, can we trust what we're being told? Which means that the big question, if you are recognising that this, if it is true, is really good, is, can you trust Thomas? Can you trust John? And most of all, can you trust Jesus? Can we trust the person who, in this account of his life, claims to be truth itself? God himself stepping into our world, speaking in human, as a human, in the clearest language we could ever possibly want him to speak to us in. Because it turns out that if truth is a person, then life itself is also found in that person. Then hope is a person. Then love is a person. And if we have turned away from God, as we all have done, as the source of truth and hope and life and love, then it turns out that this person is God himself stepping into human history in order to give us back hope and life and love and truth. That he died in order to take the death that we have earned by turning away from him. And that he rose to death-proof life, that we might be given death-proof life. And do you know, as he closes his account, pretty much closes his account, he's got a little bit more to say after this, and I'd urge you to read on. John says, actually, do you know what? You can trust this. John himself says that. Have a look at little number 30 on this page. This is John speaking now about what he's been writing. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which aren't recorded in this book. But these are written that you can believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's the invitation that John leaves us with as he closes his account of Jesus' life. And it's the invitation I want to leave you with as we finish this week of events with the Christian Union. You can trust this. Will you? Will you trust Jesus with your life? Will you trust Jesus with your death? And some in this room, many in this room are going, I have, and it's great. And you can chat with those people, some of them are people who you came along with, who invited you along, and you can find out why it's great and how that works in their life. And some in this room are going to be going, no, I'm still totally unsure about this. This still feels massive, it still feels really big, and I feel like it's just either too good to be true, or it's just too far away, or I'd like to look into it more. Then I would urge you, please, keep on listening to these things. If you get to the stage of going, I don't think it's true, then please work out why you don't think it's true. It is too big simply to just dismiss out of hand. But for some, at the end of this week, it may well be that you are reaching the point where you say, yeah, this is good, and I want to trust it. Not only that, I want to entrust myself to this risen Jesus, who is truth, who is hope, who is life, and who is love. And so what I want to do as I close this evening is give some people the opportunity to respond to Jesus, because it may well be that people are thinking, I think I've heard his voice this week. To which the obvious answer is, well, has he heard yours? Has he heard you speaking to him if you think you've heard him speaking to you? And so I'm going to suggest that for those who want to respond by saying, yes, I want to trust in Jesus, I want to entrust myself to him, I'm going to give you the opportunity to pray with me. And for all the rest of us in here, for many of us, you might be going, this feels really weird. Well, let me just say, you've come along to an event which is run by the Christian Union, and it is absolutely normal for Christians to pray. So bear with us for a minute. But equally, actually, if he loves you this much, what is more natural than speaking to the person who loves you this deeply? So I'm going to read the words of a prayer, and if you would like to, you can say these words with me in a moment. So you don't have to say them out loud, you can simply echo them in your head, and God will hear. For those of us who are sitting here going, this is really weird, well, you can tune out for a second. Think about something else. Think about who's going to win what football game at the weekend, or whatever else it might be. But these are the words of the prayer for those who do want to respond. It goes like this: Lord Jesus, I'm beginning to see that I am made for a relationship with you. I am sorry that I've looked for the ultimate source of truth and life and hope elsewhere. Please forgive me and give me the life you have promised as I begin to live to follow you. I'm going to pray that now, and if you would like to join in with me, then please do, just in the quiet of your own mind and your own heart. Lord Jesus, I am beginning to see that I am made for a relationship with you. I'm sorry that I have looked for the ultimate source of truth and life and hope elsewhere. Please forgive me and give me the life you have promised as I begin to live to follow you. Amen. You can tune back in again if you tuned out. Let me just say that if you have prayed that prayer in the quiet of your heart with me, then God has heard it and he has answered it. The next step, the next thing to do would be to tell someone. Maybe it would be the person that you came along with, who invited you along, a Christian friend. If you would like to tell me, I'd be absolutely delighted. I'll be over by the bookstore in a moment, and you can come and chat with me about that. But we'd also love to give you the opportunity to tell us in another way as well. And on your tables, this is something for everyone, you will all find a QR code that looks a little bit like this. And what I'd love you to do is for everyone to pull out your phone right now for a second and scan this QR code. What this is going to do is take you to a simple Google form, which is a response form that the CU have created to this event. We don't need any, there is no kind of expectation that you're going to leave us any contact details or anything like that, but I would love everybody to scan this QR code with your phones out. And then you can fill in this form if you'd like to. There's a couple of optional boxes. You can give us your name and your contact details if you want us to have them, and we would love to be back in touch with you to be able to follow up on things that you've been thinking about this evening. But you don't have to do that. But what I would love you to do for everyone is there's a free text box which simply says response. And you can use that to write in maybe just 3 or 4 words. Let me suggest some responses that you might want to give. It may be that you just want to write, more pizza please, because you feel like there wasn't enough pizza. That's totally fine. Write in that, that's great. It might be that you want to respond more negatively. This is all rubbish, 4 words. That's fine. Like I said, I'm not going to be offended, but I would love you to think about why you think it's rubbish and what your grounds for dismissing it are. But it might be that you want to respond by thinking, I'd like to know more about this. In which case, perhaps you'd write, read John with me, 4 words. And someone from the Christian Union could be in touch with you if you leave your contact details to offer to sit down and read John's account of Jesus' life with you. At least give it the time of day to reckon with the claims about this man. Or maybe you'd like to take up Arian's offer, invite me to church, 4 words. And someone from the Christian Union will be in touch to take you along to church, so you don't have to walk into a big weird building full of Christians on your own. You've actually got someone friendly to walk in with, and that might help. Or finally, it may be that you have just a moment ago done something momentous and prayed with me. If you've done that, what I would love you to write is just 3 words in that box. Count me in. You just write, count me in, and leave your contact details and your name. Then someone from the Christian Union will be in touch, and we would love to be able to walk alongside you as you begin to see Jesus' promises realised in your life, and you begin to find what it means to trust in the one who promises to give us life in the face of death. So if you haven't already, scan that QR code, fill that form in. We'd love to hear what you think, whatever it is you think. But for the final time, we're also going to give an opportunity just to talk a little bit more about this. I've simply got 2 questions. We've come to the end of the week. Some of us have been in this tent every night this week thinking about these things. Some of you have been here for the first time tonight. The questions that I'd love you to think about are, do you still have questions about the claims that Jesus makes and that are made about him? And how might you look into them in a fully informed way from here on? You might want to discuss those 2 questions. It may be that there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's going around your head and you just want to turn to the person next to you and go, well, I don't understand what's going on, or anything else. That's absolutely fine. Thank you so much for listening to me all week, and we'll give you a few minutes to discuss these things before the guys come up and wrap up. Woo!